I really enjoyed your book.
Oh, that's very
I've known you for quite a few years, and we've done quite a few gigs together, but there's all sorts of stuff I didn't know. It's brilliant.
Well, it was the sort of book that I had no intention of writing, because there are far too many sports autobiographies out there going over the same sort of ground. But somebody suggested if I did one that was focused solely on my involvement in motorsport, which is both in front of the camera and behind the camera, there might be a few stories to tell and a few issues to confront as well. And that's how it proved. And the exercise of writing it was quite a refreshing one, put it like that, and there was a certain element of score settling in there as well. I'm ashamed to say, but hopefully you enjoy it.
But when you've got a manuscript at the end, I guess you've got too much material. When you've been around and seen it and done it and talked about it and watched it, you probably had to leave some stuff out, I guess.
There were a few areas that what I didn't want to do was really ramble on. So whatever stories needed to be told, I wanted to tell them in a concise form, whatever issues arose. And it was a particular story of how television had evolved from, say, the early 70s, and our approach to covering Grand Prix racing and Formula One in the early 70s was such a contrast with what we've got now with Sky and the BBC working together so well. And it was really a collection of stories as to how that evolved. And particularly how the rights have been batted back and forth down the years, often with a great deal of thought from those that were acquiring the rights and those that were getting rid of the rights. And through all those events, just how we arrived at the television profile that we got these days for the sport.
Back when you started, it was a real treat to have a Grand Prix on the TV. It was the exception, not the norm.
It was. I started getting involved in the mid to late 70s. A lot of the races, I think we probably had about 6 races that were live during the course of the year. Not all of those were on the BBC. ITV was doing a number of races. We used to do the Swedish Grand Prix, South African Grand Prix on World of Sport, and the BBC would take others. And it wasn't really until the early 80s and the mid-80s that the BBC made this commitment, not initially to live coverage of Grand Prix, but certainly to the weekly Grand Prix program that became so iconic and led the way for the live coverage that was notoriously unreliable on Grandstand. I would sit there on Grandstand quite a few occasions, and you would link to, say, the opening of the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, and we would happily on Grandstand, and I'm ashamed to even confront it now, we would leave the race after about 16 laps, and we would go and do some Sunday cricket at Taunton or something like that, and come back for the conclusion of the Belgian Grand Prix at about 5:30. And nobody was bothered, nobody complained. These days it would there'd be questions in Parliament and so on, but that's how far we've come, and that is largely what the book is about.
In 2012, you were obviously fronting ITV4's British Touring Car Championship coverage. A really great profile for that championship, to have 7 or 8 hours of uninterrupted coverage on a Sunday afternoon. Really great. And of course, touring cars is it's your baby, really, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's where the involvement behind the camera really took effect as far as I was concerned. In Grandstand in the mid-80s, we were trying to reorganize our coverage and decided to make a commitment to what we saw as the principal British Motorsport Championships, which were Formula 3 and the Touring Car Championship. Touring Car Championship had a lot more sort of marketing muscle behind it, although F3 in those days had some great names coming through, Eddie Irvine, Hakkinen, Damon Hill and so on. But it was the Touring Car Championship that captured the imagination. And it's gratifying to see, even by accident, the commitment that ITV4 are making now. I'm sure they don't really understand exactly what goes on their channel on a Sunday afternoon and exactly what we're all about. But we're quite happy to say, just leave it to us, boys, and we'll fill 7.5 hours, not just with the Touring Car Championship, but with every level of British motorsport that is accompanying that in the TOCA race days. And it is great to see those championships and the British talent that's coming through have a consistent showcase and a live showcase via ITV4. And I think I was up here last year bemoaning the fact that maybe there wasn't enough commitment to the televising of British motorsport. That's not going to change. It's not going to improve. But at least ITV4 is one outlet for everything that's happening in British motorsport.
Yeah, and hurrah for that. And of course, Sky F1 involved you talking to some of the most iconic names in motorsport history. A very sort of relaxed, lifestyle-y sort of series of interviews where you were at home with the likes of Mario Andretti, Nigel Mansell, Emerson Fittipaldi. I mean, even for a man of your experience, what a treat to go and do that.
An absolute privilege. And I was talking behind the scenes here just a moment ago to David Brabham about going to the Gold Coast in Australia and talking to his father. And that was possibly the biggest privilege of all, because not in the best of health, but he made the real effort to adjust his lifestyle and adjust his schedule to accommodate a day in front of our cameras. And the opportunity to tell all the great stories from day one right the way through his racing career. And that was a fascinating couple of hours. Mario Andretti equally. I mean, you can't fail to be entertained by the range of stories and the range of his experience. And even when the attention drifted from Mario, the trophies around his sports bar in the basement of his house in Nazareth in Pennsylvania, it is absolutely extraordinary. He has kept every single bit of memorabilia from his racing career, be it a paragraph in the local newspaper, or a trophy for winning a Formula One World Championship, or the Indianapolis 500. He's kept everything, and everything is up there on the wall of his sports bar. And the only thing we didn't get was a drink.
And then there was Nigel Mansell.
And then there was Nigel Mansell, yeah.
There's a book in that, isn't there? There's another book.
I mean, dear old Nigel was... I find him absolutely fascinating.
I love him. He was winning Grand Prix when I was 14, 15, and so that was very important.
To Nigel, nothing is straightforward when you're interviewing him. Everything during the course of his career seems to have been some kind of a conspiracy and some kind of a plot. But you relate to the fact that behind the wheel of a racing car, he was an absolute lion. And he was still probably the most exhilarating racer that British Grand Prix motor racing has ever produced. And a somewhat maligned and misunderstood character, but a character nevertheless, and one I find always entertaining for a number of reasons.
I agree, yeah. So what does 2013 hold for you?
2013 is... it's hard to say how the priorities is going to work out. We're certainly back in for another season of the British Touring Car Championship and everything that goes with that. We're looking forward to the coverage, moving on even from the 60-odd hours that we had last year. The Legend series, we're talking to Sky at the moment about how we progress that series and exactly what the next list should compile. We spent last year doing the easy ones, the obvious ones, Jackie and Sterling Moss and Nigel and Mario Andretti and so on. The next lineup is going to be a little bit harder to put together. Not hard to name, but hard to get in front of a camera. The likes of Nelson Piquet and so
Carlos Reutemann, Keke Rosberg. Yeah, we could make a long list, but it's getting to them, isn't
exactly.
it?
What I want to do is just broaden it out. Take away the word legend, because that really hampers you in so many different ways, and just broaden it out to get access to the so many wonderful talkers and wonderful storytellers that Grand Prix motor racing has generated down the years, and making sure that we get as many of those in front of a camera as possible.
Well, we'll certainly enjoy watching you and listening to you. Have a great season. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Ryder.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everyone.